exists. Okay, next slide. There's another strange piece to this puzzle. Some of you may have heard of him. Howard Phillips Lovecraft died in 1937, born in 1890. He is the author of some very strange, they're hard to classify. They're not science fiction exactly, they're not horror exactly, they're not fantasy exactly, but they're very, very disturbing books. He was born in an upper middle class family in Providence, Rhode Island. He had a lonely childhood, and as a result, he read voraciously. Gee, that sounds like me. I was an only child, by the way. That might go a long way to explain some of my weirdness. The unique element of this guy's stories is how he blended horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Originally, he wanted to be an astronomer. He wrote, his first story was called The Hound, and he wrote it in 1922. His stories are all subtle, chilling, and very disturbing. Of course, he was writing, you know, like 80 years ago. So his tales are all very discreet. I mean, it's not like you're reading a Stephen King novel where there's blood gushing everywhere, or sex, or violence, or anything. He talks about unnameable horrors and things like that. But he achieves some very, very chilling effects nevertheless. He eventually began writing full-time, and his tales began appearing in the magazine Weird Tales, which was like a pulp magazine, back in 1923. This man never married and spent most of his life as a recluse living with his maiden aunts. With lushly purple prose, Lovecraft created a cosmos full of supposed elder gods and great old ones, who were allegedly old when the God of the Bible was young. So these are very, very ancient beings. And what supposedly happened in his worldview is that there were the great old ones, and the elder gods came along and tricked them into trapping them in another dimension. And the elder gods are supposedly good, and the great old ones are supposedly very evil, but they're actually beyond evil and good. Next slide. This slide I got off a website about Lovecraft because we conjured up one of these deities once, and it towered over Lake Michigan. It towered over the Marine National Exchange Bank, which is like 50 stories high. And that oddly enough caught very much what it looked like. They're shapeless things. These are the main deities in his system: Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Thulhu, Ithaqua, Shub-Niggurath, and Dagon. Of all of these, one is one you might recognize from the Old Testament. Dagon was a god of the Phoenicians. He's a fish god. All of these correspond to certain things. Let me read you what he said. This will give you an idea of Lovecraft's prose. This is what he wrote about Azathoth. Azathoth lives at the heart of the galaxy in what's called the coal sack, the very heart of our galaxy. He's called that last amorphous blight of nethermost confusion that blasphemes and bubbles at the center of all infinity. The boundless demon sultan Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud, who gnaws hungrily in inconceivable unlighted chambers beyond time, amidst the muffled, maddening beating of vile drums and the thin, monotonous whine of accursed flutes, to which the detestable pounding and piping dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, tenebrous, mindless other gods, whose soul and messenger is the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. That's one sentence. I get chills just reading it, mainly because I've faced some of these entities. Nyarlathotep figured very prominently in an experience I had. Thulhu is a sea being who supposedly sleeps under the sea in the dead city of Urlier, and he only reaches us through our dreams. Ithaqua is the windwalker. That's what I think I saw on that dock in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Shub-Niggurath is an giant, unspeakable earthworm thing, and of course Dagon is another sea deity. Next slide. Though regarded as fiction by most readers, an incredible cult following in more than one sense of the word, has arisen around Lovecraft's pantheon of world-shattering gods. And several occult masters have commented on how closely these resemble the pantheon of solar phallic deities from Crowley's system. See, here's what Lovecraft, in his stories, there's very often no women in any of his stories. There's usually the hero, if I can call him that, is some very shy, scholarly person who gets his hands on this incredibly evil book called a Necronomicon. And they find out from this book how to open doorways in other dimensions, and they end up facing these deities and going mad. Okay, next slide. Is this really entirely fictional? And does it matter? Next slide. Kenneth Grant actually believes that Lovecraft had accessed some ancient and very evil archetypes. And he thought this was a good thing, of course, unlike any sane person. So, you know, he basically felt that there's so much similarity between some of these names that it was amazing. Now, the other thing is that some researchers have discovered, like, one of his stories, let me just preface it by saying this, one of Lovecraft's stories is called The Shadow over Innsmouth. And it's set in this New England town where these horrible half-human, half-sea monster creatures shamble out of the sea, and they go and worship at the Masonic Lodge in Innsmouth. And what they do is they've gradually taken over the town. And all these residents of this town are all like horrible genetic experiments gone awry. And they're like half fish or half frog and half human. Now, what is intriguing about that is Lovecraft's grandfather, according to research that I've read, was an adept of Egyptian Freemasonry, which is a very high level kind of masonry I was involved in. And according to some researchers, he had access to some of these books. And though Lovecraft claims his works were fiction, he lived his own life as if they were not fiction. Two books that are mentioned most prominently in his work are the Necronomicon and the Von Aussprechlichen Kulten, which means of unspeakable cults. And basically, there is actually a Necronomicon out there that you can buy, and it's actually fake. It's you can go and get it at any Barnes and Noble bookstore, but it's actually a very, very pallid reflection. I've seen the real Necronomicon, and it's very, very dangerous. You don't even want to get near the thing. What's interesting about Lovecraft is that even though he said his works were fiction, he acted like he was haunted his whole life. Though he lived in Providence, he was terrified of being near the ocean. He lived the life of a hermit and recluse, mainly communicating with friends by mail. He seemed to have a morbid terror of ever going underground. He wouldn't go into a basement. He would never go into a subway or anything like that because he knew that's where these beings lurked. He was morose and sickly and died at the fairly young age of 47. Next slide. But how does this all fit in with UFOs? Well, for the first time in fiction, Lovecraft was portraying transdemonic entities as if they were science fiction characters from distant space or time. Whether by chance or malignant inspiration, he captured the concept of incredibly alien entities who come to Earth and destroy and corrupt the souls of men. Next slide. This was a spiritual war of the worlds, and it's actually very close to the truth. Again, if you read abduction literature, quite often you'll see where when people are confronted by the Greys or whatever, they're paralyzed with fear. They're paralyzed with terror. And I know, for example, Whitley Strieber, however he says his name, he talks about how in his abduction experiences that they're just this kind of nameless dread, and that's exactly what Lovecraft so successfully described. You know, because the human soul, when it comes in contact with this kind of implacable evil, it just withers up like an old geranium. And I did this kind of magic. It's called Trans-Yugothian magic, because in Lovecraft's system, the planet Pluto is called Yuggoth. And this magic comes from beyond our solar system, so it's called trans-Yugathian magic. And I'll tell you, it's the most dangerous stuff I've ever done. Next slide. Like the Greys, that I kind of talked about this, the great old ones can inspire unspeakable terror in those who see them. Serious magicians have had access to the real Necronomicon for years. And this is important. Necronomicon rituals are designed to open portals or gates to allow the great old ones to pass into our universe. And notice again, like Crowley, he died in the year 1947. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. The interesting thing is, even this bogus Necronomicon, it has some fragments of the real one in it. When it first came out, it came out in a limited edition of 666 copies. And the occult bookstore in Milwaukee had one on the shelf. And they sold it to a fellow who was a very advanced ceremonial magician. He took it home that night, and his little girl, 3 years old, went in the bathroom, locked the door, cut her wrist with a razor, and killed herself. So he took the book back. This just illustrates the power of this book. The next guy that bought the book, he took it home. He lived in a high-rise over Lake Michigan, and as soon as he walked in the door, he had this beautiful black cat. The black cat took one look at the book, went like that, started running around in circles as fast as it could, just like a black streak, and then it just went out the window, smashed through this tempered glass window, and fell 30 stories to its death. He took the book back. Guess who bought it next? Amazingly, I'm still